Hello again, and welcome to Android Design in Action. I'm Roman Nurik.
Adam Koch.
And Nick Butcher.
And today we're going to talk about Sleep Monitor apps, Sleep Monitor app, and backward compatibility. We have a lot of content to get through today, so we're just going to get started with sleep monitors. So the app that we decided to look at today was Sleep as Android. It's called Sleep as Android. This is one of the apps that was reviewed on the App Clinic last Friday by Rita Meyer. Nick took a look at this app in much detail. And Nick, do you want to jump into your thoughts on Sleep as Android?
Sure. So Sleep as Android is an application that monitors your sleep and lets you set an alarm so it'll wake you up at an opportune time when you're in a very kind of light sleep cycle. It's a very detailed app. If you take a look at it, it offers a whole ton of functionality and configuration options. And you can see that the author is very responsive to his community. He seems to have put out something like 15 updates in the last couple of months alone, which is very, very responsive. From a visual point of view, they have made some effort to kind of get towards the kind of hollow design guidelines. But my overall feeling of the application was that while it's very, very functional and powerful, I found it kind of hard to get into and understand how to operate and to prioritize what tasks I should be doing first and what information was important. So if we take a look at the application here, this is the first screen you see when you start the app. This is where you can create different alarms, as well as there's a prompt to unlock. And some of the key functionality on the screen is down there in the bottom left, kind of like a split action bar, but kind of not a split action bar at the same time. And you can see some of the functionality there is to kind of add a new alarm, start the actual sleep tracking mode, and to see some statistics of your previous night's sleep. So it seems we're short for time. Should we go straight into the redesign and see what we cooked up? So here you can see we've done. It's not a huge departure, but it's definitely we try to apply some of the hollow look and feel to the application. So straight off there's a standard action bar giving you that kind of sense of where you are and a common place to look for some of the actions. I felt like we had to kind of reorganize some of the functionality a little bit, because this main screen, while it offered the alarms, there was a lot of functionality kind of hanging off sub-screens as well. And I felt like this app has two main purposes, which is like setting an alarm to wake up at the right time and for monitoring your sleep and seeing kind of how that sleep pattern is going. So I wanted to float those right up as your primary kind of options into these two main tabs here, into these alarms and stats tab. As you can see, we've also really kind of emphasized the track sleep button. So instead of just a little button at the bottom with equal weighting to all the other options, it's now this gigantic kind of purple button. And finally, a little note on the coloring and the palette. I found some of the kind of green highlights to be kind of like grabbing your focus, saying, "Look at me, I'm a divider," which kind of felt slightly off to me. So we kind of readdressed the palette a little bit here. It's taken quite a lot of cues from the stock alarm clock in the latest version of Android, for two reasons. Firstly, I like it. I think it's a beautiful app. It might be controversial. I know not everyone thinks so. But also, this should be it's offering slightly similar functionality, so it's helping to bootstrap the user's mental model. A lot of the kind of user interface elements we've used look the same as from the stock alarm clock app. So hopefully they can get started with this application a bit quicker.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to mention about the color scheme, the kind of switch from these kind of neon green to a neon violet. I guess it's really kind of I guess it's the violet that's in the Android Design official color palette. I think that it's a little less in your face. It's still very much an accent color. It's not like a dull gray or a dull blue where it's more muted. But it's a little easier on the eyes, and I think you could even probably go even one shade darker if you want. On some devices, it may be too bright. But I mean, this is just I think it's just much easier to look at the screen and not be overwhelmed immediately.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to say is this is one of the last things you'll look at before you go to sleep. If you're about to go to bed, you're going to hit sleep. So normally, this kind of app, I immediately thought to change it to a light palette. For most apps, I think a light palette is generally a good starting point. But for this app, because you didn't want to have that that feeling of you're leaning up to your bedside table, you turn your phone, and suddenly you're kind of like blinded by intensity. So I tried to keep the tones quite mute to try and ease that kind of transition, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, in terms of navigation, I like how you've split stats and alarms into the sort of top level tabs there, and removing it from the the sort of faux split action bar that was in the previous version, leaving the two main actions sort of visible there: the track sleep and the add.
And there's a subtle. Sorry, go ahead, Nick.
I was going to say a final point, like on the before shot, you can see there's a little bug droid figure in the bottom corner, and his state changes depending on how close it is to you having to go to bed. So right there, it's kind of the daytime, and he's got a little apple in front of him or whatever. But as he gets closer to night, he starts brushing his teeth and so on. Well, I think that's useful and fun. I do really like that. I do find sometimes including a bug droid in your application, or even Android or Droid in your name of application, kind of lazy and amateurish. It doesn't really shout, this is a fully professional application, I thought through the interaction. So I tried to incorporate the same elements using something different. So if you can see on the after shot, very subtly, there's a number of kind of sleepy Zs kind of in the background to the application. The idea here being, as you get closer to bedtime, the more of them kind of start kind of coming out from the track sleep button, or even you could have them subtly animated in some way. It's very, very subtle here, but it's trying to convey the same kind of information, but in a slightly more kind of subtle way.
Yeah, and we also did a job on changing the icon. So we shifted the icon from being kind of a sleeping, cute bug droid to something very generic. This is just a very, very generic icon, but again, something that is a little more recognizable and something that is a little more unique to the app.
Cool, let's push on.
Should we move on to the next screen?
Yeah.
All right.
Alrighty. So next up, next one of the major functions I thought this app does is give you lots of information about how you've been sleeping. Almost too much information. So if we touch the graph icon on the bottom left, you get to the subsequent screen here with a number of options here. So we've picked out the stat screen here, which can have a very, very long table. And this is just a small sampling of information, because I hadn't been running the app for very long. But if you look at the developers' screenshots on the Play Store, you can see this can be a massive table, and while it gives you some average stats, it's kind of summed up over all time. Now, when I kind of like try to readdress this and think, what do I really care about? I probably only care about kind of the last week's stats. Like anything that's older than that probably doesn't really have much bearing on my kind of, how I feel my sleeping's been going. What happened 2 months ago isn't really relevant any longer. So what I've done with this screen is I've tried to provide these summary stats. So the most important thing to me is a summary of this week. How have I been doing for the last kind of, say, 7 days, or whenever the start of the week in your calendar starts from. And so we've pulled out some summary statistics, and those are big and bold, and it uses color to signify whether you are close to your target average length of sleep per night, or whether you're building up a sleep debt. So here we can see we're using kind of orange for okay-ish, blue for yeah, you're doing well, or red for warning, you're not kind of getting enough sleep. So instantly when I look at this, I kind of get this quick scannable screen which tells me what's going on.
Yeah, you can see that on Tuesday you, for some reason, didn't sleep very well. Maybe you were, out on the town the night before or something like that.
Too many Christmas parties at the moment. So we've consciously demoted a lot of information. So if you look at the before, there's other tabs for noise and graphs, as well as some kind of store as well, which didn't seem to kind of be worthy of being a top level information item. It was kind of like adding noise and making it harder for me to realize what was really important. So we've really simplified it down to these few items, and we've let you kind of roll the whole week up and down if you want to turn it into a summary or drill down into each one. We still think this information is interesting for those people who want it, though. So the idea here is that if you can tap on each of the days, you can then go forward into a subsequent screen, which is going to give you details about that one night's sleep that you've tracked.
Cool.
So here, yeah, on the next slide, yeah. So on the next slide, instead of having this whole kind of roll-up of graphs, that kind of view of all the different day as a graph didn't really tell me much. I didn't find that very glanceable. You couldn't really look at it and say, oh, that was a good night or that was a bad night. But the graphs themselves were quite cool. So we demoted them down to a detail screen. So if you touched one of each of the line items from the previous screen, you'd get through to a sleep details where it'll tell you, how long you actually slept for, how long of that was in deep sleep, what percentage, and give you that kind of really nice graph showing you exactly what your night was like, as well as frozen up the information you can capture when you record your sleep, like a rating or a comment on how good or bad it was. So these are really kind of like details which we've kind of changed the information hierarchy and kind of put these down to a subsequent screen.
Yeah, I think it was just a great job. Just, I mean, splitting up I guess, a very, very complex screen that, has good data, but it's just not as easy to consume. And showing you something that's like, letting you really look at the content, or one specific piece of content, right? The specific day, and see all the details on that. I think it's just like a good combination of different types of pieces of the content, like a graph, some averages, some data like that, potentially allowing the user to provide a comment, or even providing a recommendation, like maybe you should wear something or sleep still, or who knows. I know nothing about sleeping medication or anything like that, but giving the user all these different types of components to their one night of sleep is a really interesting and unique way to present that.
Yeah, personally, I really like the typography that you've used here, Nick. On both this screen and the other screen, it just really brings out the important information, and plus the coloring really helps you glance at it and see what's going on.
Cool. There's one final redesign idea we had for this application, and that's to take advantage of a cool new feature in Android 4.2 called Daydreams. So for those of you who might not be aware, Daydreams is kind of like a screensaver functionality. So you can set up a Daydream to say that when my device is docked or charging, kick over into this kind of like a screensaver. So what I thought would be really, really cool is, rather than having to manually go into the application and start it to track you sleeping, it would be awesome if just the fact that, I guess most people like me probably plug their phone in at night, so it's charging overnight. So just doing that is enough to, say, kick off a Daydream, which will then start tracking your sleep. I imagine you'd probably put some logic in there if it's in the middle of the day or something like this. You wouldn't actually kick off Daydream. But yeah, just the act of plugging in the device and putting it down on your bed could then kick off the functionality. So I really find anything which means, it's a bit of a burden on the user to have to go into this application every night and remember to do it, hit the start button, hit the stop button, and remember to do that in the morning. So anything you can do to automate that process, I think, is going to make the user more regular. They're going to keep on using it and see the value of your application. So I thought a Daydream might be a cool way to do that.
Yeah, it's just another way to step up the level of, or the feeling of magic in this app, where, if you can automatically track these things, then do it, right? So, before, say, 9 p.m., 10 p.m., if it turns on, or if your phone goes idle, maybe you just show a clock, or, it's fairly easy to just create a simple clock Daydream that just shows the current time and the current date. But then, after a certain point, it kicks into kind of tracking mode and shows the clock. And maybe this is a way to, play like, soothing sounds in the background or something as you're sleeping. So since this app is already doing all this data capture, maybe you can use that intelligently to even improve your sleep as you're, as you're sleeping, maybe by playing sounds or something like that. So lots of ideas here. I think the Daydream idea is really good here, Nick.
Yeah, and of course you can interact with Daydreams as well. So, you could still have something that you could touch and resize, or potentially graphs during the day that you could look at, or something like that.
Mm-hmm. All right.
So overall, a really nice app with lots of functionality. I hope the developer likes some of the ideas we've thrown around there and perhaps take runs with them.
Yeah, and if you're watching, if you're the developer of this app and you're watching, feel free to let us know what you think on Google Plus, or even email or whatever. But definitely looking forward to talking to you if you have any questions, or if you want some ideas, or even some of the source PSD files or anything like that. If we ever review your app or take a look at your app and we do a mock-up, if you want the sources, they're always available. No licensing issues, whatever. We'll just hand them over to you. So.
And we do it with love. I saw some comments for our past redesign of Tasker saying, "Is that a slap down from Google having them to redesign your app?" That's not what this show is about. This is about what it could be. We'd love to kind of work with you to help you kind of like get the best out of Android design that you can.
Yeah, and almost all the apps we review, they're awesome apps. They're really just good. They're fulfilling their functions really well. So.
Right, we need to move on.
Yes, we should. So we got 15 minutes left. We need to fly through backward compatibility. So we have a lot of slides on backward compatibility. Fortunately, a lot of them are screenshots. But let's get started. So before we talk about our strategies and tips for backward compatibility, and specifically for designing for backward compatibility, not so much for developing for that. I mean, we have lots and lots of training sessions and all that for developers, but this is really more targeted at designers. Before we share some of our own tips here, I definitely make sure that you designers out there are looking at the design guidelines for compatibility. The guidelines page for compatibility is fairly short. It only talks about a few important things. Some of the things include the legacy menu button, how action overflow behaves across different devices. So it's definitely stuff that you should be aware of before jumping into mockups.
Just pause this video right now. Go read it. We'll wait.
All right, let's move on.
Yeah, we do have a lot to cover. So backward compatibility. So the way we view backward compatibility is that for each screen in your app, and you could extend this to your entire app or just an individual widget. For each screen, visual styling and the behavior, basically visual and interaction design, can boil or can operate along a spectrum of how close it is to the primary version of the app. So, for example, if I have an app design for Android 4.0 and above, and I have hollow elements in there, on earlier versions on Android 2.3, Gingerbread, Froyo, whatever, you can make a choice of either taking that hollow design or your completely custom design and using it on that device. Or you can kind of say whatever the device default is. For example, for checkboxes on Gingerbread, they were green instead of blue. On some devices back then it was like blue or red or whatever. You can make the choice that I should use the device default, or you could just choose something in the middle. So usually it's a little harder to make everything hollow back to Gingerbread and Froyo, and it's very, very easy for developers to just use the device defaults, and then this hybrid is kind of somewhere in the middle. So the hybrid solution, you have to be kind of careful about it. It can still really work, and we'll show you guys in the screenshots coming up that hybrid UIs where some components are hollow and some components are using the device default styling, they can work. So we'll show a couple of examples of those. But this is really how we see this kind of the way you decide on a backward compatible strategy, right? You kind of pick somewhere along the spectrum. And depending on where you choose, you need to work with your developers on this, but depending on where you choose, that'll change the amount of effort involved for developers, and certainly it'll change the final outcome. But just be aware that these are the different options, and there's really no correct choice. I'd say, like I said before, you can do it correctly, you can do it right using any one of these different options. It's really up to you to make sure that it just works well.
Yeah, it's really just a trade-off between these different options. Like, there's more effort involved on the left side of the spectrum, but you'll have a more consistent look. On the right side, it can still work, as we'll show you in the screenshots shortly. So.
A bit more effort. There's some tools out there to help.
Sure. Absolutely, yeah, and we'll talk about the tools out there that are more relevant to developers than designers, but still, definitely there's stuff out there to help. Mm-hmm. So, having said that, hollow, a lot of people ask us, is hollow for Android 4.0 and above, right? I mean, like, should I even try to use hollow in earlier versions of the platform? And our answer is yes. I mean, hollow is not designed just for the latest devices out there. Hollow is designed for all people, for all humans. It's a design language for human-computer interaction, not just human Android 4.0 plus interaction. It can work everywhere. It obviously takes some effort to make it work, but again, as a designer, you need to think of it less as the styling of Android 4.0 and really as the identity of Android. So that's an important point to make. Another is that the core experience across all platforms should really be consistent. You shouldn't really have to design an entirely separate app for Gingerbread and for Ice Cream Sandwich. So things like the action bar, those should be visible and persistent across all devices. You shouldn't, switch into a completely different UI on earlier versions just because there's no built-in framework component. And again, we'll talk about that. So things like layouts, like the core layouts, the navigation, like swiping between tabs, and the core interactions, like the basic way you choose choose a contact, for example. Those should really behave the same across different OS versions. And I think that for design, and this is really the last point, is more about developers. But be opportunistic beyond the core experience, the core navigation, and like really the core feel of the app. Like the individual checkboxes and the spinners and things like that. Be opportunistic about it. Make sure that nothing looks really bad, obviously, but be opportunistic and don't put yourself in the position where you must have everything pixel perfect, because that's just a losing battle. It's going to take too much time, and you're going to kind of lose focus from what's really important, that is the core experience of the app. So before we go on, any other points, guys, about these three?
Nope.
Okay.
Let's go.
Solid. Let's go.
Let's do it.
Another thing to mention, this is more on the tactical side. So one of the big differences, and you'll see this in the screenshots, between Android 4.0 and Android 2.3 and such, is the typography, is the font, right? So Roboto is the default on Android 4.0 and higher, and Droid Sans was the default everywhere else. So this is one area where you really shouldn't try to just take Roboto and use it everywhere on Android 2.3. The reason being that users are really accustomed to seeing, like their eyes almost expect to read text in a certain way on their device, and so you should really just use the system default font. The good thing is that for designers, when you're planning out the widths of your elements and things, you have to think obviously how many characters will fit in this line or in this UI widget. And the good thing is that Roboto and Droid Sans are metrics compatible, meaning that if you take the same piece of text in Roboto and Droid Sans on an Android 2.3 device and Android 4.0 device, you'll notice that they're pretty much the same width. So what's more important here is like things like translations, where for example, the German version or the German strings for something will cause things to be really, really wide. That's more important to think about than like just saying, oh, I need to choose the right font here. So be more aware of that than just like the difference between Droid Sans and Roboto in English, for example. And then also, this is again more for tactics, but in your process, it's really important for designers to participate in the device testing process. So usually you'll have a QA team or maybe a developer that has a whole bunch of devices, and they're kind of testing the APKs on all those devices. Designers should really participate, because sometimes designers in a team are some of the most kind of visually sensitive folks. So they'll be able to pick out what the little quirks are. And so as a designer, you should try to introduce yourself into the QA process. Not obviously full time, but spend some time making sure that you're testing the output on earlier versions of the platform as well as different devices, so you just get a feel for what it looks like.
And there's a bunch of continuous integration tools that once you that test your app on different versions and will produce screenshots, and you can take a look at a screenshot generated on an older or smaller device or something, which will help you here.
And this is something that Nick, you alluded to earlier, but if a developer comes to you as a designer and says, we can't do this specific UI because it's only available on Honeycomb and above or Android 4.0 and above, that's not always a great excuse, because there are great libraries out there that solve this for them. So don't have to think that, I need to design an app with an action bar and an app without an action bar and an app with like all hollow components and an app with 0 hollow components, because it's just not available. There are lots of libraries out there that'll help you. Here are just a few. So Action Bar Sherlock, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. That basically is almost 100% backport of the Action Bar to previous versions of the platform. Hollow Everywhere actually gives you a lot of the standard widget styling, like spinners and text fields and such. And actually they do a lot more like calendars, calendar view and things like that. They give you a lot. This library gives you a lot of stuff that you can just backport to earlier versions. So if a developer comes to you and says, I absolutely cannot use the action bar because it's not available on earlier versions of the platform, fight that. Tell them that you do have tools available to you, and maybe there's that's not the greatest reason for not doing it. So before we move into the screenshots, any extra thoughts, parting wisdom for backward compatibility strategies?
I think
Hollow all the things.
hollow everything.
all the things. But it's really, it's really up to you, right? As a designer, you should be aware of the different types of devices out there, be aware of the tools that developers have to them, and make the right decision for your app. There's no kind of...
Just more seriously, I'd say that if you had infinite resources, you'd probably end up writing a version of your app which looks, right at home on Ice Cream Sandwich, right at home on Gingerbread, right at home on Froyo. But given not everyone has the resources to do that, you kind of want to put most of your effort into kind of skating where the puck's going and like designing for Hollow. And then, like Roman says, be opportunistic about backporting the kind of finer pixel control stuff, like where you have capacity.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so in the interest of time, since I think our producer actually has to run in about 5 minutes or so let's fly through some screenshots. So all these screenshots are going to be apps that kind of we feel do the right thing, and you're going to see that it's a combination of that universal Hollow everywhere, kind of a pure device default, and somewhere in the middle. So this is tasks free. This is both the interactions and visuals on Gingerbread and Jelly Bean, and you'll see that throughout all these screenshots. So this is just their edit screen. You'll notice that they have Hollow pretty much everywhere, Hollow styling everywhere. This is the same, tasks free. And all these slides will be available after. And by the way, guys, feel free to jump in as you see fit. But this is all just, and again, another example of apps that kind of have a pure, a pure universal look and feel here. Mm-hmm. This is Pattern, another app that there's a really good example of how to do things like almost perfectly replicated across Gingerbread and Jelly Bean. And this is an example, the first example you see where there's hybrid styling. So the Play Store on Gingerbread uses kind of the standard text fields and a custom button style. And on ICS and above, they use the Hollow text field styling and the Hollow, actually I guess it's also a custom button. But again, it works really well in both cases. There's no obvious mismatch of components here. This is one minor case I wanted to point out where almost everything here in Series Guide is Hollow except for the little stars. And so these stars here in Gingerbread are green, on ICS they're blue. And really it doesn't really detract from the experience that it's sharing some styling and that it's, I guess, using what the device has as a default. This is an example of the I/O app where this is just one minor screen where there's a mix of styling. This actually, we need to improve this for next year. I think this could be better. But this is an example of where it kind of works fairly well, but could be improved.
And that's a great example of what you're talking about with the typography, where the Droid Sans looks right at home on Gingerbread and the Roboto looks right at home on ICS.
And note, all of these use Droid Sans on Gingerbread and Roboto on ICS. Another quick example from the recipe search app of text field on the left, text field on the right. This is an example of using, I think it's from How About We, which is an online dating site, where they use kind of a mix of Hollow styling for Gingerbread and platform default styling. And it's really, again, it works okay. The core feel and experience in the app is really, maintained. It's just this one screen has kind of a mix of widget styling. So I think it still works quite well. Another example from How About We. So this is another case, search, where by default the platform has this like built-in search mechanism. So if you use something called Search Manager, which is kind of irrelevant for designers, but the platform default search looks a certain way on Gingerbread, and you should really try to use that because users are really used to that. Whereas on Jelly Bean, there's another different type of way to do it using something called Search View and the action bar that that shows that same kind of autocomplete stuff. So it's really very, very similar. The implementation is slightly different for developers, but again, it's using what users would expect. Standard platform stuff on the left and the standard action bar stuff on the right.
Another example of the TED search view versus old Gingerbread styling.
Yep. Place, and this is an example of preferences where preferences you generally want to use the system default styling. You don't want to have your own custom styling there. So where possible, use the standard preference, activity preference fragment to do all that stuff for you.
And apps like Tasks, which have generally themed everything Hollow style, in their preferences they still fall back on the standard. Oh, here we go.
Yeah.
Beat me to it. Same as TED.
And then this is real quick to talk about contextual actions. Jeff, if you have to go, by the way, by all means. Contextual actions, this is something that's kind of controversial. Like, do you backport the contextual action bar, which is kind of, I'd say, a minor interaction. And I think that's really up to the developer. If it's easy, then do it. If not, then don't do it, unless it's the core experience in your app. In this case, for pattern, the core mechanic here is to work with patterns. So allowing users to do multiple selection of the patterns makes sense here. But certainly, I think it's still secondary, where you can still perform these actions in kind of a detail screen. So don't feel completely obligated to backport the contextual action bar. I will say the action bar Sherlock does this contextual action bar backport for you. So something to keep in mind. And then this is an example of the IO app, which in which we chose not to backport the contextual action bar. So here, when you long press something, you just get a context menu, which again is more standard on earlier versions of the platform. Another screen from Pattern, where they've chosen the device default styling for dialogues, and they've actually correctly flipped the positive and negative actions in the dialogue, which is good. And then some more from the Play Store, and I think that's the last one. Yes. Okay. So that was backward compatibility. Obviously, we can't cover such a big topic in such a short period. If you guys have comments, thoughts, feel free to post online. And if there's anything we missed, we may even touch on this sometime in another.
Yeah, maybe we should do a follow-up show.
Yeah, for sure.
Lots of content here.
Let's fly through design news, since we have very little time. First, Taylor, as always, has been doing redesigns. He did a really cool redesign on a movie ticketing app using the wizard flow, or the wizard pager example that I pushed out a few weeks ago. Which is really cool. This kind of custom card style here for the tickets you've purchased. Really cool. Obviously, we recently launched the official Android design community on Google+. Here's just a couple of examples of posts there. If you haven't seen it yet, I'd recommend joining. Lots of good content coming out from there. And
I'm loving this community. Really, really high quality of discussion going on in there. Good job, guys.
And lastly, Nick, do you want to talk about the responsive headache relief for Android slides?
Yeah, this is a really beautiful presentation. I highly encourage you to check this out if you want a good summary or take the temperature of where responsive design is on Android, especially from a web developer's point of view. Really, really good presentation. Recommend it.
Awesome. All right, I think that's it for the show. Thanks to everybody who tuned in. We will not see you next week. This is actually the last show of 2012. We will see you sometime in 2013. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Roman Nurik.
Adam Koch.
Bye from Nick Butcher.
Have a great holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays.